Hello and welcome back to another video. This is about a small plugin that I've created for Adobe Lightroom Classic, that's the desktop version, and it allows you to convert the negatives into a positive. This was from a request that I got from a friend of mine who basically asked that question. Can I make something for him which allowed him to easily perform this task? Not something that I've thought about in the past, but having spoken to him through Zoom, I quickly understood where he was coming from. He actually scans his negatives using a camera. A lot of people are doing this method today. They've got a DSLR camera. They'll have some kind of a system where they put the negatives in here and then shine a light underneath it. And then they'll have a stand or something, a copy stand, and they'll just make a photograph of the negative. That's becoming quite popular today. What he was experiencing is the way that Lightroom then handles that when he brings it in to make some adjustments. And I can show you exactly what he was referring to here. So this is a scanned negative, quite a good tonal range. We've got blacks going all the way through to the whites, so we've got shadows on the right and highlights on the left. So the first thing we need to do is just get this into a positive state, which we can do just by inverting this tone curve. And then the question that he was concerned about was when he now makes an edit inside of Lightroom in the positive state, the slider controls was not doing what he was expecting. And normally we would think of a slider control that if we move it to the left it's going to remove something, and if we move it to the right it's going to add something. So in the case of exposure, if we want to brighten the image we would move the exposure slider to the right, and if we wanted to darken that image we'd move it to the left. But as we can see here in Lightroom, by moving the exposure slider to the left, it's actually increasing the brightness. And if we move it to the right, it's darkening the exposure. And that's because Lightroom is controlling the underlying image, in which case it's a negative in this instance. So it's always looking at the negative state. And some of these other sliders as well will have the opposite effect. You might find that the whites control the blacks and the blacks control the whites and so on. So I think it was more of a case where his muscle memory wasn't sort of engaging with this, and he was just normally expecting the sliders to work in the correct orientation. So I came up with a small plugin, and I'll demonstrate that plugin now for you. So let me just reset this back to its original state, and I'll load the plugin under File, Plugin Extras, and we'll bring up the plugin. So this is the black and white negative converter. One plugin with quite a few sliders on it, nothing too complicated. The first part of the workflow is we need to get this into a positive image, so I'll press Convert Black and White Negative. This gives us the positive version. You'll see that on the tone curve that we've now got this curve appeared. Normally with a DSLR type camera or any digital camera, it produces a linear curve. So we go from pure blacks through to pure whites in a linear fashion. The problem with the digital sensor or the digital type of capture is that when we get to the top end, the highlights, if we go too far, they're just going to fall off into nothing. We're going to go past what the sensor can record, so we end up with no tonal information. That doesn't quite happen with film. Film has its own characteristic curve. Each film has its own curve. That curve can change depending on how you develop that film, how you expose that film to light. But more films, especially in the black and white range, will have this very smooth roll off in the highlights and a gradual ramp into the shadows. And then in the middle we've got this contrast. So I've created this generic film curve. It's not based on any film, it's just a generic curve where we've got this roll off of the highlights, and then we've got this gentle roll off into the shadows, and this is what the plugin is built around. So the tonal controls we've got consist of exposure, contrast, shadows, highlights, blacks and whites, typical sliders that you would expect to see inside of Lightroom. The only difference is that this time, if we want to increase the brightness or the exposure of this image, we would do what we think is the correct approach, and with that we'd move it to the right. If we want to darken the image, we'd move it to the left. So the sliders now are more intuitive because this is what we are normally used to working with. The small button on the right is a reset button, and that will bring it back to its default position. So these are quite straightforward, self-intuitive. You'll notice that when I increase the exposure or the contrast or any of the sliders, it's not changing the shape of this curve. So all these settings are additive to what this curve is giving us. So it's building the settings on top of this starting point, this generic curve. So I'm trying to retain that film look the best that we can in a digital environment by not abruptly losing those highlights and not abruptly losing those shadows. If you was to measure the value of this black, you'll find it's not pure black, it's just slightly above black. And the reason for that is because even if we exposed a blank piece of film and developed it, we're never going to get a pure black reading. And that's because we've got this level or base fog to contend with. The same with the highlights. I'm sort of going up to around the 250 mark, if anybody's interested in the numbers, just to give us that gentle roll off into the highlights. So tonal adjustments is quite straightforward. If you do want to change the shape of the curve, this is where the curve shape sliders come into play. So for example, if I want to increase some contrast in the midtones, I'm going to move this part of the curve. So moving the slider, you'll see that the curve is getting steeper and the contrast is getting increased as well. I'm not giving too much of a boost. I'm going to a +12 because if you went any further than that, you're really going to start to crush those blacks down. The highlight fall, this is the highlight here, the top left. If I bring that to the left, you'll see that's lowering the highlight value. And if you do want it to go to pure white, then you would increase it all the way to the right. And that just brings in that top end value. The highlight roll off, if I move that one, you will see that this is the value here. It's changing the shape of this roll off into the highlights. So the highlight roll off and the highlight fall do seem to work better if you move them together to keep this tonal range as a smooth curve at the top end. And then the shadow lift, this is going to lift the shadows up. So again, moving it all the way to +10, we can see that we've now lifted the shadows even further up the curve. If you do want those deep blacks, or as black as you can get, bring it all the way down to the left and then it jumps into the 0 range. So I'll just reset that. And that's basically what the plugin does. We've got some buttons along the bottom. We've got a help button which will open up a PDF. We've got the standard about, cancel and OK. Clicking cancel will take it back to its original state. OK will close this dialog and then we can end up in Lightroom where we can do any further edits. The registered button is here because this particular plugin is now available as a trial version. So you can download it free of charge, install it, and you've got about 10 iterations of the convert. So you can convert it 10 times before the trial expires. If you like what you're seeing, if you think it's going to help you with your workflow, then you can purchase a license, and you would press this button, which would be enabled, and then just enter your license details in. So that's the black and white negative converter. As I say, press OK. We're now back in Lightroom. And then from here, we can make any further changes that we want. If we do want to change the shape of the curve, then this is the place that we can do it. This is changing the shape beyond what the plugin can give us. We might want to increase the brightness in this tonal range, or we might want to have a steeper contrast. So again, after we've done that initial conversion, we're quite free to make any further changes. Remember, when we're converting from negative to positive, we're not actually thinking about this is going to be the final edit. It's just getting it from that negative state into a working positive state. And all the time that we're doing that, we want to be keeping an eye on the histogram, obviously, to make sure that we're not losing any valuable information. So that's just a quick rundown on this plugin that I've created. I'll leave a link for the plugin in the description below. And as I say, this particular one, you can download it free of charge to try it out. And if you like it and want to add it to your toolbox for Lightroom Classic, then by all means purchase a license for it. So thank you for watching, and until next time, bye for now.